The first thing I noticed that night was the lemon-scented cleaner on my mother's hands. I had just pulled into their driveway in a quiet suburb outside Denver, sat for a second with the engine ticking, and watched the porch lights spill onto the walkway like it was trying to make everything look neat. I remember adjusting the collar of my jacket, like that would change anything. Inside, my mom was lining up plates on the kitchen island with the careful speed of someone setting a display, not a dinner. She looked up, smiled, and said, "You're cutting it close." Like it was an update about the weather. No, "How are you?" No, "I missed you." Just the checklist. My dad was already at the table with a stack of mail, flipping envelopes one by one. He nodded at me without lifting his eyes. That was his version of welcome. I'm Sam Reyes. I was 27 then, and if there's one thing I learned growing up in that house, it's that image comes first, truth comes last. I was usually the one expected to absorb whatever kept the picture clean. A few minutes later, my sister Lena walked in like she'd stepped out of a catalog. Smooth hair, polished smile, the kind of confidence that gets praised in our family. Behind her came her boyfriend, Grant Holloway. It was my first time seeing Grant in a full family setting. He had the easy posture of someone who's used to being liked. He shook my dad's hand like they were already on the same team, kissed my mom's cheek like it was normal, and then pulled out a chair for Lena with a little flourish. My parents lit up in a way I hadn't seen for me in years. We sat down. The roast chicken smelled good. The kind of good that almost convinces you things might be normal. Silverware clinked. My mom's bracelet tapped softly against her glass every time she reached for something. Conversation flowed around me more than with me. My mom asked Grant about his week and laughed a little too hard at details that weren't funny. My dad asked follow-up questions about his job, like he was studying for an exam. Lena watched him the whole time, smiling whenever he spoke, like her face was reflecting what she wanted the room to feel. I stayed quiet and ate. Quiet wasn't weakness for me. Quiet was how I stayed intact. It didn't take long for the spotlight to turn. Grant looked at me with that polite curiosity people use when they've already decided who you are. "So, what are you doing these days?" he asked, casual and friendly on the surface. I answered simply. I didn't offer a story. I didn't decorate it. I gave him enough to be true and not enough to be used. The air shifted anyway. My mom's shoulders tightened. My dad's jaw set for half a second. Lena focused hard on her fork like the pattern in the plate suddenly mattered. Grant noticed. I could tell he noticed. And instead of letting the moment pass, he leaned back in his chair like he'd found his opening. He started talking about himself, projects, meetings, strategy, the kinds of words that sound impressive if you don't ask for specifics. He spoke smoothly, like he told the same story before and knew exactly where the room would nod. My parents nodded. Of course they did. Then he smiled at me, just slightly, and said, "You still have a lot of free time during the day, right? Must be nice." It landed the way he intended it to. My mom gave a quick little laugh, the kind she uses to keep things light. My dad chuckled once and swirled his drink like he was enjoying a clever line. Lena's smile tightened. Nobody corrected him. Nobody asked what he meant. They let the label sit there on the table between us, unemployed, drifting, behind. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, but it wasn't shock. It was the old, familiar lesson. If I reacted, I would be the problem. If I stayed quiet, everyone could pretend they were just joking. So I stayed quiet. Grant kept going, warming up as the room rewarded him. He talked about ambition, stability, work ethic. He described responsibilities in a way that sounded confident, too confident. And somewhere in the middle of his little lecture, he dropped a detail that made my breath catch for a half second. He mentioned a specific kind of internal analytics review, something tied to a division I knew well from my own time in consulting circles. Then he casually attached it to the department he claimed to work in. It didn't fit. Most people wouldn't have noticed. My family didn't. They were still smiling, still impressed, still relieved to have someone in the room they could brag about. But I noticed. Not because I wanted to catch him, Not because I was offended, because the words were wrong in a way that felt practiced, like he'd borrowed them from somewhere and didn't understand the structure underneath. I didn't call him out. I didn't ask questions. I didn't even change my expression. I just listened, and I remembered. Dessert came out. Store-bought pie, warmed too long, cinnamon heavy in the air. Plates scraped, people relaxed. Grant looked satisfied, like he'd done his job, and I sat there with that one misplaced detail turning over quietly in my mind, knowing I would check it later, and knowing, without being able to explain why yet, that it was going to matter. When I left that night, I didn't slam the door. I didn't make a speech. I hugged my mother, nodded at my father, and stepped out into the cold air. Then I drove home in silence and put my phone face down on the coffee table. And I waited. The next morning, I woke up earlier than I needed to. It wasn't anxiety. It was that quiet, alert feeling I get when something didn't add up the day before, and my brain is still holding the thread. I made coffee and stood by the sink while it brewed, watching the slow drip into the pot, letting the kitchen stay silent. My phone was still face down from the night before. I left it that way for a minute, like I was giving myself permission to think before I let anything else in. Grant's voice replayed in pieces. Not the insult. I'd heard versions of that my whole life. The part that stayed with me was the small, wrong detail he tossed out so casually, like he expected nobody at the table to know the difference. People exaggerate. People inflate. That alone wasn't interesting. But Grant didn't just exaggerate. He performed. He used the kind of language that's meant to impress people who don't ask questions. And in my family, nobody asks questions if the answers might ruin the image. They just nod and move on. I'd spent a few years doing contract work, nothing glamorous, mostly process improvement and analytics projects for mid-sized companies. Enough to recognize how departments actually talk. Enough to know when someone is using terms the way they read them online, not the way you use them in meetings. I sat at my small dining table with my laptop open and kept it simple. I didn't dig in a dramatic way. I didn't do anything invasive. I started with what anyone could see. I searched Grant's name with the company he claimed to work for. I looked at public profiles, press releases, conference agendas, any published team announcements that included the types of projects he described. I checked the company's career pages too, not because I was looking for him there, but because job postings tell you how the work is actually structured. For a while, everything looked clean. His profile existed. The company name was there. The general role was believable. Even the tone of his biography fit the kind of person my sister would choose. Ambitious, driven, a little polished in that careful way. But then I started comparing the details. The internal analytics review he mentioned had a specific name, an internal term, not the kind of thing people outside that structure usually say correctly. Grant had used the right phrase, but he'd attached it to the wrong department, like he'd learned the words without understanding the map. I pulled up the org structure, what was publicly available anyway. I found leadership references, division names, location notes. Then I opened a separate tab and wrote down a short list of the phrases he used at dinner. Not a big list, just enough. I did it the same way I've always done things when something feels off. Keep the emotion out, keep the information organized. By noon, I had a clear impression of what bothered me. His story was stitched together. The pieces all existed, but not together in the way he said they did. He'd mixed responsibilities from different divisions, described workflows that didn't match the department, and talked about executive access in a way that sounded like a pitch, not a routine job. Still, I didn't want to assume the worst. There are cross-functional roles. There are special projects. There are people who end up doing work outside their title. It happens. So I did the one thing I trust more than the internet. I reached out to someone I used to work with, Maya Caldwell. We'd overlapped on a project a year earlier. She was sharp, discreet, and the kind of person who answers questions with enough detail to be useful, but not enough to be reckless. I didn't mention Grant. I didn't mention my family. I didn't even mention why I was asking. I just sent a simple message. Hey, quick question. In that company's analytics wing, does the performance review process sit under operations or finance? And who typically owns it? Maya replied within an hour. Her answer was clear, specific, and it made Grant's dinner story impossible in the way he'd told it. The process he described wasn't handled by the team he claimed to be on. The kind of review he referenced didn't even touch his department unless you were in a completely different role. I read her message twice and felt something settle in my chest. Not anger, not satisfaction, just clarity. I put my phone down and stared at the steam rising off my coffee mug. The kitchen was quiet again, and in that quiet I could see the pattern more clearly. Grant wasn't careless. He was confident. The confidence you get when you believe nobody in the room will challenge you. The confidence you get when your audience wants your story to be true. My sister wanted it to be true. My parents wanted it to be true. And they wanted it so badly that they were willing to make me small in the process, because that kept the spotlight where they wanted it. That part didn't hurt the way it used to. It just explained things. Later that afternoon, my mother texted our family group chat, one of those cheerful, overly formal messages that always feels like a public announcement. Dinner was so lovely last night. So glad we could all be together. Lena added a heart emoji. My father didn't respond. Grant replied with a short message about great company and good food. I watched the messages appear and disappear on my screen. Then I opened my notes again and added one more line under the phrases Grant used. He knows the right words. Under that, I wrote, who taught him? That's when I thought of Alex. Alex Nguyen wasn't a close friend. More like someone I'd done solid work with in the past. An investigator by nature. The kind of person who could trace a detail back to its source without making noise about it. He wasn't the type to gossip. He was the type to confirm. I hesitated for a moment, not because I was afraid, but because I knew that once I involved someone else, I was committing to following the thread. Then I sent the message. Hey Alex, quick question. Do you have time to look into someone's employment history? Public filings only? I just need to confirm something before I step into a mess. He responded faster than I expected. Send me the name and what you need verified. Keep it tight. So I did. I sent Grant's full name, the company he claimed to work for, and one line. Confirm role and any linked entities. Anything unusual. Then I set my phone down. I didn't feel dramatic. I didn't feel like I was taking someone down. I felt the way I always feel when I'm solving something. Calm, focused, and patient. That evening, after the sun dropped and the apartment went dim, I sat on my couch with my laptop closed and listened to the quiet. No music, no TV. Just the small hum of the fridge and the distant sound of traffic through the window. I told myself I would let it go if Alex came back with nothing. I meant it. If Grant was just a guy who liked to sound important, I could live with that. But if he wasn't? I picked up my phone once, checked that the message had delivered, and placed it face down again. Then I waited. Alex didn't reply that night. I didn't take it personally. If anything, the silence told me he was actually looking. Alex was the type who didn't send updates unless he had something real to say. The next day moved slowly. I went through my normal routine, answered a few emails, did some small admin tasks I'd been putting off. I cleaned the kitchen in a way that had nothing to do with dishes and everything to do with keeping my hands busy. Around mid-afternoon, my phone lit up. A message from Alex. Found something, not illegal on its face, just odd. Call or text. I stared at the screen for a second longer than necessary. Then I typed back, text is fine, keep it factual. He sent a short summary first, like he was easing me in. Grant's name appeared as the registered agent on paperwork tied to a small consulting entity, an LLC filed out of a virtual office suite in Phoenix. The address wasn't a real office. It was one of those corporate mail services that rents you a mailbox and a lobby photo. The company name was generic, clean, Forgettable. No website, no staff listings, no public-facing portfolio, no press. Nothing that showed real activity. Alex followed it with a second message. He's also listed as managing member. Looks recent, last 18 months. I felt my shoulders tighten. Not with fear, but with that familiar confirmation when a suspicion becomes structured. People create LLCs all the time. I've created one before. It doesn't automatically mean anything. But in Grant's case, it was an extra layer that didn't match the image he'd sold at my parents' table. If he was so busy in a demanding corporate role with executive engagement and high-level reviews, why was his name quietly attached to a company that existed only on paper? I sent Alex one line. Anything connected to money? There was a pause. Then a longer message came through. Not directly visible like payroll, but I can see irregular deposits into the LLC's business account through some accessible banking metadata in filings. The amounts vary. Several incoming transfers from personal accounts. Names don't match his. No vendor patterns, no invoices I can see. I read it twice. Then I set the phone down and sat still. The apartment felt unusually quiet, like the air had changed density. I could hear the faint buzz of my refrigerator again. Somewhere outside, a car alarm chirped and stopped. I didn't feel excitement. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt cautious. Because there was a difference between a person who exaggerates to impress and a person who builds a structure designed to collect money without leaving a clear trail of work behind it. I wasn't ready to accuse him of anything, but I could see the outline of something. A shell with no product. A storefront with no inventory. A story built to convert admiration into trust. I texted Alex back. Can you go one layer deeper? Not hacking. Only what's public. Look for disputes, complaints, anything filed. Also, anything that ties this LLC to investor language. His reply came almost immediately. Already started. Give me a day. After that, I did something that surprised me. I checked my sister's social media. I hadn't looked in months. It wasn't bitterness. It was self-preservation. Watching Lena's curated life used to make me feel like I was observing someone else's family through a window. Her page was full of engagement photos, vineyard visits, close-ups of her hand on Grant's chest, captions about growth, alignment, future. Grant's comments were always the same tone, smooth, supportive, almost rehearsed. I scrolled without reacting, like I was reviewing a case file. Then I opened Grant's profile. His posts were business adjacent, motivational quotes, photos in suits, vague references to big meetings and big weeks. Nothing concrete. Nothing that ever said where he was or what he actually did. And that, oddly, mattered more than it should have. People with real work don't usually need to advertise the idea of work that often. They just work. That evening, my mother called. I almost didn't answer. But ignoring her only tends to create a bigger scene later, and I wasn't interested in scenes. So I picked up. Her voice had that bright, controlled tone she uses when she's already chosen the version of the conversation she wants. "Hi, Sam," she said. "I just wanted to say, last night was really nice. Grant is such a breath of fresh air." I said, neutral. She didn't notice, or pretended not to. "He's taking Lena to dinner this weekend, somewhere downtown. Really classy place. And we're so happy for her." I could hear her smiling through the phone. Then, without warning, her tone sharpened slightly. Still polite, but pointed. "And you know," she added, "it might not hurt if you started thinking about what direction you're going in. Being between things at your age isn't exactly ideal." It was the same line, just dressed up differently. I let a beat pass. Not long enough to be dramatic, just long enough that she'd feel the pause. "I'm fine," I said. She sighed softly, the way she does when she wants to sound like the reasonable one. "I just worry. People ask questions." There it was. Not worry about me, worry about perception. I have to go, I said, still calm. I'll talk to you later. She didn't like that, but she let it go. After the call, I stood by my window and watched the streetlights turn on one by one across the parking lot. The sky was a dull blue-gray, the kind that makes everything feel flat. That night, I didn't open my laptop. I opened a folder on my desktop and labeled it with one word: Grant. Then I created subfolders the way I would for a work audit. 1. Claims. 2. Public records. 3. Transactions. 4. Disputes. 5. Timeline. It was simple, clean, the opposite of emotional. I started with what I already had: screenshots of his public profile, Alex's notes, the LLC filing details. I saved everything with dates in the file name. Then I wrote down the first rule for myself in a plain text document: no assumptions, only verifiable facts. Under that, I wrote another: if it can't be proven, it doesn't get used. I didn't know what I would do with any of it yet. I wasn't plotting a confrontation. I wasn't fantasizing about exposing him. I just knew that my family wouldn't listen to feelings. They never had. If anything was going to land, it would have to land through paperwork. I closed the folder, set my phone face down again, and went to bed earlier than usual. At 7:12 the next morning, Alex's name flashed on my screen. I reached for the phone without sitting up. His message was short. Okay, this is bigger than I thought. I found 2 small claims filings linked to people who say they were promised returns. Not directly naming him, but the trail is there. Sending docs. I stared at the words until they felt real. Then I sat up slowly, feet on the floor, and opened the file attachments. The documents Alex sent weren't dramatic. No shocking headlines, no bold accusations. Just the kind of paperwork that looks boring until you understand what it implies. 2 small claims filings from different counties, a few pages each. Names, dates, amounts, short statements written by regular people describing the same shape of problem. Money given, promises made, no return, no clear documentation afterward. The filings didn't scream fraud. They just showed frustration and a trail that didn't close. What mattered was the pattern. I sat at my table with my coffee cooling beside me and read each page slowly, like I was reviewing a contract. Then I opened my folder. I didn't let myself spiral into story. I stayed with structure. That morning, I wrote out a plan in the simplest form. 3 steps, no emotion. Step 1. Separate what I know from what I think. Step 2. Build a timeline that stands on its own. Step 3. Decide when and where truth can be presented without me becoming the problem. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about saving my sister in some heroic way. Lena was an adult. She chose Grant. But she was also walking into something she didn't understand, and my family's love of appearances made them easy targets for someone like him. I pulled a notepad closer and wrote down everything Grant had claimed at dinner, only the claims that could be checked. Company role and department executive meetings and responsibilities, the internal analytics review term he used. References to private investor engagement language. Then I started filling in what I could verify. His public profile and the vague job title. The LLC filing details Alex found. The virtual office address. The irregular deposits pattern. The small claims filings and dates. I didn't need to interpret it. The timeline did that on its own. By lunchtime, my folder looked like something I would have built for a client audit. Not because I wanted it to be formal, but because formal makes it harder to dismiss. My parents don't respect feelings. They respect paper, titles, and anything that looks like authority, which was exactly why Grant had been able to walk into their dining room and become their favorite person in under an hour. That afternoon, Lena texted me. It was brief, casual, like nothing had happened. Hey, you coming to Mom's next weekend? We're doing a little engagement thing, just family. I stared at the message. I could feel the old instinct in me, the one that wants to keep peace by saying sure and showing up and swallowing whatever happens. But another part of me felt calmer than usual, because now I had information, and information changes the terms. I typed back, "Yeah, what time?" She replied with a time and a heart emoji. Nothing else. No apology for Grant's comment. No acknowledgement. That was Lena. She didn't like friction. She preferred pretending things were fine until the pretending became impossible. After that, I kept working. Alex sent one more message that evening. I found forum chatter, not mainstream, private investment groups. Someone matching his writing style posts opportunities. Same buzzwords, same tone. Some people praise him, some question him. One claims they lost money. Old thread, about 2 years. I asked him to send screenshots. He did. I saved them under disputes and renamed each file with the date. Then I sat back and looked at my timeline again. A person who is legitimate doesn't usually leave that kind of scattered trail. And if they do, they can explain it cleanly. Grant, from everything I'd seen, didn't explain things cleanly. He performed them. That night, my dad called. He almost never calls unless there's a reason, so I answered right away. "Sam," he said, "your mother told me you've been quiet lately." I kept my voice even. "I'm fine." He made a small sound like he didn't believe me or didn't like the simplicity. "You know," he continued, "Lena is very happy. Grant is a good man. He's got a future. It would mean a lot if you didn't bring negativity into this." The sentence was smooth, but the message underneath was familiar. Don't ruin the picture. I could have argued. I could have asked what negativity meant. I could have said 100 things. But arguing with my father is like trying to change the weather, so I used the only approach he responds to. "Okay," I said. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" There was a pause, like he didn't expect me to be that direct. "Just be supportive," he said. "This is important for the family." I nodded even though he couldn't see it. "I'll be respectful," I said. That was true. Respectful doesn't mean silent, it means controlled. After the call, I opened a fresh document and wrote one more rule for myself. If I speak once. If I show something, I show it clean. No debate. Then I started preparing for the engagement dinner. Not emotionally, logistically. I printed the timeline onto 2 pages. I printed the LLC filing. I printed the small claims summaries. I printed the forum screenshots with the usernames blurred, focusing only on the language and the dates. Everything labeled. Everything neat. I didn't staple anything. I didn't highlight in bright colors. I didn't make it look like an accusation. I made it look like what it was, a record. Then I slid it into a plain manila folder. No title, no drama. I placed the folder in my desk drawer and closed it. For the next few days, I acted normal. I responded in the group chat. I let my mother's cheerful messages pass without reaction. I didn't ask Lena questions. I didn't speak to Grant. I didn't give anyone a reason to brace for impact. I just prepared. The night before the engagement dinner, I ironed a shirt, checked the weather, and set my keys by the door. Then I opened my desk drawer, took out the manila folder, and set it on the corner of my table where I couldn't forget it. I stared at it for a moment, not with fear, but with a kind of quiet certainty. If I walked into that house with nothing but words, I would be dismissed. If I walked in with paper, the room would have to at least look at it. I turned off the lights, went to bed, and slept more easily than I expected. The next day, a little after 5, I picked up the folder, slid it into my tote bag, and locked my apartment door behind me. My parents' house was louder than it usually was. When I pulled up, I could already hear voices through the front door. Laughter, the clink of glasses, my mother's bright tone rising above everyone else like she was hosting a small show. I walked in with my tote on my shoulder and the familiar tightness in my chest that always came with that threshold. The entryway smelled like vanilla candles and roasted meat. My mother had dressed the table the way she dressed everything in her life. Polished, symmetrical, meant to look good from a distance. There were only a few people there. My parents, Lena, Grant, and my aunt, who lived nearby and never missed an important family moment. That was it. It was still enough. My mother greeted me with a quick hug that didn't linger and immediately stepped back to look at me, like she was checking whether I fit the scene. "You made it," she said. "Good." My dad gave me the same small nod. My aunt smiled too wide. Lena walked over and hugged me in a way that felt hopeful, like she wanted the night to be uncomplicated. Grant stood behind her, hand resting lightly at her waist, already in his role. He looked put together. Pressed shirt, confident posture, the easy smile of someone who expects to be liked. When he saw me, he held my gaze for half a second longer than necessary, then smiled like we were fine. "Sam," he said, "glad you could make it." I returned a small nod. "Hi." Nothing more. We ate. My mom served plates like she was on a timer. My aunt asked Lena about the ring. My dad asked Grant about work. Grant delivered smooth answers, perfectly timed, the kind that don't say much but sound impressive. Everyone leaned in. I ate quietly and listened, letting the rhythm of the evening show itself. The more attention Grant got, the more relaxed he became. He told a story about a big week, sprinkled in a few phrases that made my dad nod, and kept his tone warm and harmless. At one point, my mother looked at me and said, lightly, "And Sam is still figuring things out, but we're proud of her." It was said with a smile. It landed like a label. Grant chuckled softly, like it was a friendly truth. I didn't respond. Dessert came out. Small slices of cake my mother had ordered from an upscale bakery. There were candles. Of course there were candles. My mother dimmed the lights like this was a photo moment. My aunt raised her glass first. "To Lena and Grant," she said, voice thick with excitement. "To love and new beginnings and a future that just shines." My mother clapped quietly, eyes already wet in that controlled way she uses when she wants to look moved. My dad smiled with pride. Lena beamed. Grant put an arm around her shoulders like he was being photographed. They all turned toward me, waiting for my reaction, my participation, my approval. I took a sip of water instead. Grant leaned forward, ready to speak. I could tell he had something prepared. He had that look, like he was about to deliver a few polished lines that would seal the room even tighter around him. Before he could start, I set my fork down gently. The sound was small, but the table quieted anyway. I didn't rush. I reached down, slid my toad off my shoulder, and placed it beside my chair. My mother's smile flickered. My dad watched me with mild irritation, like he didn't like unexpected movement. Lena looked curious. Grant's eyes narrowed just slightly, then smoothed back into calm. I pulled out the plain manila folder and set it on the table in front of me. No dramatic gesture, no slam. Just a placement, like paperwork at the start of a meeting. My mother blinked. "What is that?" I kept my voice steady. "It's information." My dad's expression tightened. "Sam, not tonight." I looked at him briefly. "It is tonight." Grant gave a small laugh, like he wanted to make it harmless. "Is this about the little joke last time? Because if it's not about that," I said evenly. The room went still in a different way. My aunt shifted in her chair. My mother's face pulled into that polite alarm she wears when something threatens the image. Lena stared at the folder. "Sam, what is this?" I turned the folder slightly toward her. Not toward my parents, not toward my aunt, toward Lena. "It's a timeline," I said. "Public records and documentation. Nothing personal, nothing private." Grant's smile stayed in place, but his eyes moved quickly. Folder, Lena, my father, back to me. My mother's voice sharpened. "You had no right. I didn't do anything illegal," I said, still calm. I didn't access anything private. I asked for verification on public filings and complaints. That's it. My dad leaned back, jaw set. Complaints? I didn't answer him. I kept my attention on Lena. Before you sign anything, I said, before you merge finances or take on obligations, you should see this. Grant's posture changed. It was subtle. His shoulders lifted slightly. His hands tightened together for a moment, like he was bracing. Lena slowly opened the folder. She didn't flip through quickly. She read the first page, then the next. Her expression shifted in stages: curiosity, confusion, then a stillness that spread across her face like she was trying not to react. Grant leaned in, trying to see. Babe, it's probably just... Lena lifted a hand without looking at him. Just a small stop. My mother stood halfway up from her chair. Lena, don't. Sam is jealous. She's trying to ruin Mom, Lena said quietly, still reading. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room. Grant reached for the folder, like he wanted to take control of it. I put my hand on the top page, lightly, not pulling it away, just holding it in place. He froze. I looked at him and spoke as plainly as I could. You can explain it, but you don't get to take it. His face flushed. Not fully, just enough. His jaw worked once like he was searching for the right tone. This is insane, he said, still trying to sound calm. You don't even know what you're looking at. Those filings could be anyone. That LLC could be... People make LLCs all the time. I agree, I said. That's why it's organized by dates and linked to the same address and the same pattern of deposits. If it's innocent, you'll be able to explain it cleanly. My dad slapped his palm lightly on the table. Enough! This is a family celebration. I kept my voice even. It's also a legal partnership she's entering. My aunt whispered, "Oh my God," under her breath, like she didn't mean to. Lena kept reading. Her breathing had changed, shorter, tighter. The room watched her like she was the judge. Grant's voice sharpened. You went digging because you don't like me. I went verifying, I said. There's a difference. My mother's eyes were glossy now, angry and embarrassed at the same time. You always do this. You always have to make everything about you. I didn't respond to that. I didn't need to. Grant tried again, faster this time, words stacking on top of each other. This is out of context. Those forums are garbage. People say anything online. And small claims, anyone can file. Lena finally looked up at him. Her face had gone pale in a way that made my stomach drop. Not because I wanted her hurt, but because I could see the moment her certainty cracked. Grant, she said quietly, what is the Phoenix address? He blinked. What? The virtual office, she said, tapping the paper with one finger. Why is your company registered to a mailbox suite? Grant's mouth opened, then closed. His eyes flicked to my father like he wanted help. My father didn't move. My mother's voice rose. Lena, stop interrogating him. This is exactly what Sam wanted. Lena didn't look at her. She looked at Grant. Answer me. Grant's composure thinned. It's just for business mail. It's not a big deal. And the deposits? Lena asked, still quiet. Why are there deposits from personal accounts under names I don't recognize? Grant's breathing changed. His smile was gone now. The room could feel it. My dad stood up. Sam, go home. I nodded once. Okay. I stood slowly, picked up my tote, and left the folder on the table in front of Lena. I didn't take it back. I didn't snatch it away. It wasn't mine anymore. As I walked toward the hallway, my mother followed me, her voice sharp but controlled, like she didn't want the neighbors to hear through the walls. You are unbelievable, she hissed. You couldn't let her have one night. I stopped at the front door and looked at her calmly. I didn't take her night, I said. I gave her information. My mother's face tightened like she wanted to say something cruel and familiar. Behind her, I could hear Grant's voice rising now, faster, defensive, and Lena's voice staying quiet but firm, asking the same question again. I opened the door and stepped out into the cold air. The porch light hummed softly above me. I stood there for a moment with my keys in my hand, listening to the muffled noise inside the house shift from celebration into something else. Then I walked down the steps, got into my car, and sat still with my hands on the steering wheel. I didn't start the engine yet. I just waited. I drove home without music. The streets were mostly empty, and the quiet inside the car felt cleaner than the air in my parents' dining room. When I got back to my apartment, I didn't pace. I didn't replay the argument. I put my keys in the same bowl by the door, hung up my jacket, and poured a glass of water like it was any other night. Then I sat at my table and opened my laptop. Not because I wanted to win, because I knew what would happen next. My family would try to rewrite the story while it was still warm. They would say I was bitter. They would say I made a scene. They would say I misunderstood. They would treat the evidence like it was a mood instead of a record. So I did the only thing that keeps truth from being reshaped. I documented it. I opened my folder and created one more file. 6. Post-dinner notes. I typed the date, the time, who was present, and exactly what happened in plain language. Lena opened the folder. Lena asked about the Phoenix address. Lena asked about deposits. Grant did not provide a clear explanation. My father told me to leave. My mother accused me of jealousy. I saved it and closed the laptop. Then I put my phone face down and went to bed. I slept, but lightly. At 6:41 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Lena. "Are you awake?" I stared at it for a second, then typed, "Yes." Her reply came immediately. "Can you talk?" "Not in the group, just you." I didn't call right away. I sat up, took a breath, and grounded myself the way I always do before hard conversations. Feet on the floor, shoulders relaxed, voice steady. Then I called. Lena answered on the first ring. Her voice sounded different. Not dramatic, not hysterical, just thinner. "I didn't sleep," she said. "I figured," I replied. There was a quiet pause. I could hear something in the background. Maybe a ceiling fan. Maybe her breathing. "I need you to tell me," she said. "How sure you are." I didn't answer emotionally. I answered the way the folder was built. "I'm sure of what's verifiable," I said. "The LLC filing is real. The address is real. The 2 small claims filings exist. The forum posts exist. The deposit pattern Alex flagged is consistent with what he sent. Everything in that folder is either a record or a screenshot." "Who's Alex?" she asked. "A former colleague," I said. "He checks public trails. He doesn't speculate." Lena's breath caught slightly. "Grant said you hired someone to stalk him." "I didn't hire anyone," I said evenly. "I asked for public verification." Another pause. Then she said quietly, "He left early last night." I didn't react. I waited. "He said he felt attacked," she continued. "He said he was humiliated. He said I should have defended him." "And did he answer your questions?" I asked. Lena didn't speak for a beat. "No," she said finally. "He kept talking around them." That was the point. Someone with clean facts doesn't talk around them. Lena kept going, voice still controlled but strained. "I asked him to show me his business bank records. He said it was none of my business." I let that sit. Then I said, calmly, "If you're planning to marry someone, it's your business." She exhaled like she'd been holding air all night. "I asked him about the deposits," she said. "He told me it was private investors and that the details were complicated. But when I asked for names, he got angry." I didn't need to say, "Of course." I just listened. "I feel stupid," she said, and the word came out small. "You're not," I replied. You trusted someone who sounded confident. That's not stupidity. That's normal. There was a quiet sound. Maybe she wiped her face. Maybe she shifted in bed. She stayed quiet for a moment, then asked, "Can you send me the digital version of everything? Not printed. The actual files." "I can," I said, "but I want you to do one thing first." "What?" she asked, wary. "Don't confront him alone," I said. "Not as a fight, as a process. Ask once. Ask clearly. If he refuses, you treat that refusal as your answer." Lena didn't argue. That told me more than anything. After we hung up, I emailed her a link to a shared folder, read-only at first, containing the same structure I'd made for myself: claims, public records, transactions, disputes, timeline, post-dinner notes. Everything labeled with dates. Then I texted Alex. "Lena is asking questions. She may need one more verification. Any tie between him and the small claims names beyond address trails. Only if public." Alex replied 20 minutes later. "Already cross-checked. I can't prove direct ownership of their accounts without private records, but I can show the same mailing address and repeated contact email patterns in a couple of filings. Sending." He sent screenshots. Not smoking guns, just more alignment, more overlap. Enough that a reasonable person would pause. At 10:13 a.m., my mother called. I let it ring twice, then answered. Her voice was cold, controlled. "What did you do?" I kept mine neutral. "I presented documents." "You embarrassed us," she said, "in our home." "I didn't raise my voice," I replied. "I didn't insult anyone. I gave Lena information." My mother's breath came sharp. "You always have to create problems. You couldn't stand that she was happy." I didn't argue with the emotion. I went back to reality. "This isn't about happiness," I said. "It's about whether he's honest." My mother scoffed. "Grant is honest. He has a career. He has a future. You saw how everyone—" "I saw him dodge basic questions," I said calmly. She went quiet for a moment, then sharpened again. "Your father is furious." "I understand," I said. "You're not coming here for a while," she added, like she was issuing a sentence. I didn't beg. I didn't plead. I didn't explain. "Okay," I said. That single word seemed to irritate her more than any argument would have. She wanted me to fight for the role they assigned me. When I didn't, she had nowhere to place the blame neatly. She hung up without saying goodbye. An hour later, Lena texted again. "He's coming over. I told him I want to talk. Can you stay on standby? Not to jump in, just if I need you." I stared at the screen. My instinct was to say yes immediately, but I chose my words carefully. Yes. Keep it calm. Ask for specifics. One question at a time. A few minutes passed. Then another message from Lena. "He's here." After that, nothing for a while. I sat at my table with my laptop open, not refreshing anything obsessively, just keeping the screen awake. I made tea and let it steep too long. I watched the sunlight move across the floor. At 2:47 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was Lena. Just one line. He admitted he's between roles. He said the corporate job ended months ago. He didn't tell me. The LLC is real. He says the money was temporary funding from people who believed in him. He refused to show me anything else. I read it once, then again. The truth wasn't dramatic. It was smaller than the image. That's how it usually is. Lena sent another message. I asked him why he lied at dinner. He said he needed your parents to respect him. I sat back in my chair and felt something settle. Not anger, not satisfaction, just inevitability. Because it wasn't only that he lied, it was who he chose as his audience. And the method. He used my family's obsession with image as a lever, and he used me as a contrast to make himself look brighter. A few minutes later, Lena wrote, I told him to leave. He cried. Then he got mad. Then he said you ruined everything. Then he left. That sequence made sense. Performers cycle through emotions like tools. Lena's final message came at 3:19 p.m. I don't know what happens next, but I'm not signing anything. I'm pausing the wedding planning. I feel sick, but I'm glad I know. I didn't write a long reply. I kept it simple and steady. You did the right thing. Drink water. Eat something small. We'll go one step at a time. She reacted with a single heart. That night, my dad sent one text. You went too far. I looked at it, then placed my phone down. I didn't respond, because the truth had already done what it needed to do, and arguing with my father would only pull me back into the old cycle where feelings are treated like crimes. I closed my laptop, washed my mug, and wiped the counter in slow, even strokes. For the first time in a long time, my apartment felt like mine, quiet, orderly, and not waiting for anyone's approval. And when I turned off the lights, I realized I wasn't bracing for the next family dinner. I was just done. The next morning, I cleaned my apartment like I was resetting a room after a storm. Not aggressively, not as a distraction, just the small, quiet kind of cleaning that makes a space feel stable again. I rinsed the dishes, wiped the table, folded a blanket I hadn't touched in days. The kettle clicked off, and I poured tea into the same mug I always use, the one with the chipped rim. I sat by the window while the city warmed up outside. Cars starting, a dog barking once and stopping, someone's footsteps in the hallway fading down the stairs. Ordinary sounds. The kind that remind you life keeps moving whether your family approves of you or not. My phone stayed face down for most of the morning. When I finally picked it up, there were no new messages from my parents. That didn't surprise me. Silence is one of the ways my family punishes people. If they can't control you, they withdraw until you come back asking for permission to exist again. I didn't feel the pull to chase them this time. Around noon, Lena texted. Just 2 sentences. I told the venue we're postponing. I told him not to contact me for a while. Then, after a pause, can I come by later? I don't want to be alone in the house. I stared at the screen, felt my throat tighten for a second, and then relaxed again. Not because everything was fine, but because her message was real. It wasn't performance. It wasn't a curated family announcement. It was a person choosing safety over image. I replied, yes, come whenever you want. No pressure to talk the whole time. She sent back a simple, okay. That afternoon, when she arrived, she looked smaller than she had at my parents' table. Not physically, just in the way her shoulders held themselves, like she'd been carrying something heavy and didn't know where to set it down. I didn't ask for details right away. I handed her tea. I pointed her toward the couch. I put a bowl of fruit on the table between us. Normal things. Anchors. For a while, we just sat there, listening to the quiet. Then Lena spoke, eyes fixed on her hands. I keep replaying it, she said softly. Not the wedding stuff, the dinner. The way he talked. The way Mom and Dad looked at him like he was the answer to everything. I nodded once. Yeah. She swallowed. And the way they laughed. I didn't need her to finish that sentence. We both knew who they were laughing at. Lena's voice stayed calm, but it shook at the edges. He told me he needed them to respect him. Like that made the lying okay. It doesn't, I said quietly. She looked up then, and her eyes were tired. Why didn't I see it? I kept my tone even. Because you wanted to believe him. That's not a moral failure. It just means you're human. She stared at the tea for a moment. Mom keeps texting me, she admitted. Not about him, about the embarrassment, about the guests, about the venue. That part didn't surprise me either. My mother doesn't process pain like most people. She processes optics. I said, "You don't have to answer right away." Lena nodded slowly, like she was learning a new rule. Then she asked something I didn't expect. "Were you scared?" she said, "when you put the folder on the table?" I considered it honestly. "I wasn't scared of him," I said. "I was scared of what they would do to you if they couldn't keep the picture perfect. I was scared you'd get locked into something before you had facts." Lena's mouth tightened. She blinked hard once. "They blamed you immediately." "I knew they would," I said. She was quiet again, then whispered, "I'm sorry." It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. Just a small sentence that landed cleanly. I nodded once. "Thank you." We didn't talk for hours. We didn't dissect every detail. We just let the truth exist between us, without forcing it to become a fight. When she left that evening, she hugged me longer than usual. Not the polite family kind. The real kind. The kind that says, "I get it now." After she walked out, I washed the mugs and put them back in the cabinet. I wiped the counter. I took out the trash. The same quiet routine again. And I noticed something. My chest felt lighter. Not because everything was solved, but because I wasn't carrying the same old role alone anymore. 2 days later, I got a message from my aunt. It was short and careful, the way people write when they want to seem neutral. "I hope you're happy with yourself." I read it once and didn't respond. I didn't owe anyone a defense. My father didn't call. My mother didn't apologize. The family group chat stayed unnaturally cheerful, full of unrelated updates and forced normalcy. The silence around what actually happened was loud. But for the first time, the silence didn't make me feel small. It made me feel free. That week, something else happened. Something small, but it stuck with me. A woman from a previous contract reached out on LinkedIn. Her message was polite, almost hesitant. She said she'd been introduced to a man through a mutual friend. He sounded impressive. He used a lot of the same language Grant used: investors, strategy, big connections. She asked me, casually, if I'd ever heard of him, and if I could sanity check his claims before she committed to anything. I stared at her message for a long moment. Not because I was eager to get involved in someone else's life, but because I realized this wasn't rare. People like Grant don't just show up once. They move through rooms that want to be impressed. They find families that reward confidence more than truth. I didn't answer her immediately. I saved the message, closed my laptop, and made another cup of tea. Then I waited. If you've listened this far, thank you for giving me your time. And before you go, take a second to like this video and subscribe if you want more calm, real stories like this one. I'd also love to know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Drop your city and the time in the comments so I can see how far this story reached. 2 popular stories will appear next, and I think you'll recognize the same pattern in both of them.